of what we did last time. Yogen Bhai, do you want us to do the Namokar mantra?
Sure, absolutely. Jai Jain, everybody. Please take a moment, close your eyes, relax. Take a nice deep breath, inhale, hold, and slowly exhale. Once more, nice deep inhale. Hold and exhale. And one last time with a smile, with being mindful about our breathing in and out. Let's take a deep breath, inhale. Hold, hold, and slowly exhale. Let's all do the Namokar mantra together, and please do contemplate on the meaning as we are chanting the Namokar mantra. Namo Arihantana, Namo Siddhana, Namo Aidiana, Namo Vachayana, Namo Loe Sarvasam, Eso Panch Namokaro, Sarva Bhava Pranashno, Mangalaraj Tabbesim, Paramam Koi Mangla. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Okay, great. Amit wasn't here. Amit, you want to introduce yourself, and Yogen Bhai also, if you want to introduce yourself. Go ahead, Amit.
Hi, everyone. So I'm originally from Chennai. I was born and raised there, but I moved to Memphis 6 years back I finished my medical school there, and I'm doing fellowship now in oncology in Memphis.
Great. And Yogen Bhai, you want to quickly introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi. Good to meet you guys. I am based out of Boston. Been a Pathshala teacher for many, many years, and developed a book called Jain Way of Life that we'll reference here a little bit, and done a lot of work in developing new content, new material on how to make Jainism more relatable, more interesting, easy to follow. And hopefully we'll talk about that, but also get feedback from you guys. So I'm so looking forward to it. And then I do hope that as we're going through this, you're actively sharing your thoughts and giving feedback so we can continue improving this, and almost to the point where you guys can turn around and give this in your family, in your community, this kind of overview on the modern view of Jainism.
Great. So I want to take about 5 minutes, and Jigar Bhai, welcome, and share with you what we discussed last time was a modern roadmap, talked about the why we were doing this, making Jainism more relatable, bringing joy, happiness to ourselves, and creating excitement and pride in our Jain values, and unveiling the Tattva Sutra. Talked about the elevator speech, what is Jainism, the 3 core principles, and where they came from, the Jain way of life, what Yogen Bhai talked about. And then we've talked about the Jain path model, the philosophy. Today we're going to talk about the philosophy, principles, the AAAs we talked about last time, and then practices, and the AAAs, Ahimsa, Nekantvad, Parigra, and then went into the translation or crosswalk between traditional and modern Jainism. And then this is what we'll be discussing today, looking at the theory of life, soul, and karma. And then previously that, and the many things that we do. What good is the religion if we don't relate it to our day-to-day activities and what we should be doing? So yes, I took an extra hour of sleep today and tried to practice the a non-violent way of being towards our own body, being less stressful as well. And we'll talk about some of these practices which can make our lives better, many of all of which are derived from the Tattva Sutra. And we've talked about ahimsa in more detail, and then not being violent to the self, and then anekantvad in a model, taking a look at various perspectives. And then we talked about aparigraha and talking about basic needs and greed, where there is a continuum. And then we talked also about doing a self evaluation, which we'll go over more today. So any thoughts, comments, or questions on what some of the things that we talked about last time? Anyone? Sanjay bhai, any thoughts that you may have had over the week, or what you've heard last time? Sanjay bhai, any thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
I thought about it,
Yeah.
and like to be honest with you, I'm learning Jainism and
Okay.
try to learn what we can do more about it and how we can make it in our life, like the title of the course.
Sure.
And,
Sure, absolutely. And other
and try
thoughts?
to learn whatever best I can.
No, absolutely. Jigar bhai or Anisha ji, anything from your end?
No, I think it's the same. I think I'm looking forward to our discussions today. Okay.
Okay, great. All right. So what we will talk about today is we reviewed the sessions, and what we want to go today is dive into happiness. So Yogen bhai, I'm gonna, or maybe from the group as well, what is happiness is a question. And then what we want to talk about is, from Jainism, how do we get to happiness? So Yogen bhai, you want to open up this conversation on happiness?
Sure, absolutely. I would like for all of us to take a moment, a minute or so, to contemplate on what makes us happy. Think about short term, think about some of the past things that you've done that's made you happy. So let's do it now.
So what do people think? What is something that makes them happy?
I just want to put 30 seconds for people to think about it, and then I want to hear.
Okay.
Okay, good. So Anisha, do you want to share some thoughts as to what makes you happy?
You'll just have to unmute.
Okay, we'll come back to Anisha. How about Amit?
So my first thought came to me was my family and friends. I think being able to spend more time with them and being able to do things I like with them, I think that makes me really happy. And then the second thought was work. I think being able to do something I like definitely makes me happy. I think not having to stress about things, I think does make me happy. So that's a general thought, but yeah.
Great. Anisha, you had unmuted yourself for a moment. Do you want to try again? Okay. We'll hold off here, or Sanjay bhai, who wants to go?
I mean, obviously, what whatever I like to do, if it happen, that makes me happy, obviously. But it makes me more happy if I can be help to anybody else.
Yep. Great. Jigar, anything you want to add?
No, I think similar, like basically just day-to-day activities and just small accomplishments also make me happy. Like if I'm able to achieve all the things that I had planned for, I think those make me happy on a regular basis. Uh, I think that's what happiness is for me. And then being close to
Got
my
it.
friends and family. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's your
Anisha?
plans, expectations? Yeah. Go ahead. Anisha, go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. I was having some trouble. Okay. So yeah, the people I'm attached with, specifically my kids and my family. If the affection makes me happy, like if they're attached to me, and if they're happy, I'm happy. My family is happy.
Yes.
So that's the most. That's that's the most important thing for me in the life, and then that's the most
Absolutely.
important factor.
Very
which-
nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. And so wanted to share with you sort of what is a potential definition of happiness, the sciences, and then how it relates to Jainism. So you'll notice on the left, there's this triangle called the Maslow hierarchy of needs. And I don't know, some of you may remember in high school studying this or in college psychology class, where the basic needs, physiological and safety, are strong elements of happiness. And then we have psychological needs, right? Belongingness, being loved, relationship, and then even beyond that, having a sense of purpose and being creative, right? Realizing our full potential. And so this is what was there in the 90s, 1940s, and so on. And this continues to be a very strong definition of what is fulfilling for us. If you look on the right, we've taken a similar thing and we've added a couple of interesting elements to it. So the first is health, affection, security, purpose. We're going to go into each of these.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's all right. But if you look at the top, our goal is to find this definition of equanimity and what that is, and what is the path to that. So let's go to each of these. So the first one is health. I didn't hear so much about health from you guys, but without that, Manoj said that, oh, you know, he got good night's sleep. This is by far one of the strongest elements of happiness. As you can imagine, happiness has many dimensions. Next one. And by the way, feel free to add, Manoj, anything, but I want to go this fast because we have 4 or 5 theories to cover after this. And I want to make sure that, and we'll come back to happiness at the end, but at least we want to start with some definition and some common terminology. The second one.
And it's important to begin to tease out what causes us happiness, because it helps the opposite. What is making us unhappy? If you ask that question, what is making us unhappy, then we can begin to see these elements. Imagine if you had a sore throat. Imagine if you bumped your toe and it was really aching you. That would make you unhappy. And so the opposite is good health. And another element is affection.
Correct. Actually, before I talk about affection, there's one thing I wanted to share. So let's say I'm planning a vacation. I think about the beautiful beach we'll be hanging out on, you know, vegan food that we'll have, relax, read a book, and on and on and on. So we ruminate, we plan, we do all these great things, right? And we get excited about it. We forecast and we plan. After we do our vacation, let's say it goes exactly as we planned, the happiness that we have is actually less than all of the planning and rumination we've done, right? And so we have to be careful that where we are in our stage of thinking about happiness, living through, and then we'll come back to this as we discuss some of these theories later. But so after that was affection. Someone said family relationship was the most important thing. And we know all the scientific studies have shown that relationship is by far the highest determinant of happiness. Security. As you can imagine, in today's world, we don't have to worry about physical security as much. Financial security seems to be overwhelmingly huge, and relationship security, right? If you're going through a bad relationship and so on, that could significantly impact your happiness. And once you have a lot of those, then significance or purpose. Without a sense of purpose, without a sense of making, thinking that you're helping animals there, you're helping other human beings, you're helping family, and even our institutions and so on, it's important to have a sense of purpose. And the last one, the thing on the top that we had was equanimity. So we say joy, we say happiness, and eventually those are more short term. Equanimity is longer term. It's more of our core. It's the peace and the harmony. So next slide, Vinod. And when we put it all together, we get this very interesting word called hasi. I know it means laughter and so on, but nonetheless, health, affection, security, significance, equanimity. And it would be really good if you guys can contemplate on this later and say, where are you in each of those as you're progressing through life? And what elements help and strengthen this? And we have to make this as part of our core. And so we often don't talk about happiness in Jainism. We often talk about almost everything else, but in our day-to-day lives, we are striving for happiness. And it's important for us to understand what a potential definition could be and how it relates to us.
So thoughts,
Any
comments?
thoughts?
Yeah, before we get into the types of happiness. Sanjay bhai, does this resonate with you? Does this help us bring depth into happiness, better understanding of the elements of happiness? What do you think, Sanjay bhai? Yeah, you'll have to unmute. Or Jigar?
I wanted to ask, basically, so we are talking about happiness in the physical world, whereas like the old way of thinking or the way of thinking in Jainism is more about like we shouldn't be caring about the happiness in the physical world. So how do you think about that, and what are your thoughts on those things?
Very good point. How do we relate this into the spiritual, right? So this is a lot in the physical world that we've put in. Great point. And we're just going to get to that in a minute. Other thoughts or comments?
And you mentioned we don't talk about this. Is there a reason we don't in Jainism? Like, why is it not talked about?
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is because what Jainism is saying is that we should be going into not the physical realm, but going into the spiritual realm. And so, but for a great deal, and for great many individuals, we need to have these core health, affection, security, significance, at least at a level that there is contentment of them. So here is where Jainism comes in. And I think this slide is really what can help us navigate the physical and the spiritual. So when the word unhappiness is really loaded, and what we need to do is to unpack. And what we did was in the hasi, the health, we unpacked the physical part, and then just began to touch on the spiritual part. And so our present, if we look at it from a spiritual realms, our present happiness, someone can say it's short-term happiness or Someone can say it is just present happiness. It is when we get joy, pleasure, like the taste of chocolate or a smell of a rose. That's present happiness. Now, Jainism doesn't really advocate a great deal on that, but because it's advocating something else. Then
a lot of it is, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we are householders, right? As compared to monks and nuns and other spiritually enlightened pundits and members of our community, Jains, their path is significantly different. Our path is significantly different. 99.9% of the time, and us, 99%, we are on a different path. And we're not thinking day to day about moksha or nirvana. We're thinking about the happiness in our physical world, in our lives on earth today.
So we don't want to undermine the present happiness. In lots of conversations, this is sort of assumed that, okay, and it is thought to be negative, joy and pleasure. What we're saying is that we shouldn't think of it as negative, especially for the next generation of kids and even others. Let's say that there is joy and pleasure in life, and let's recognize it that it is short-lived. If you want a piece of chocolate, enjoy that piece of chocolate in the present moment. Now, if I give you one piece of chocolate, does that taste good? Gives you joy? Yes. 2, okay, bit more joy. 3, content. I'm content. I have 3. 4, 5, 6. When you begin to double, triple, or smell roses every day, the present happiness doesn't last. And that is what religion is saying. Do not get lost in just present happiness. So, do you see, Amit, where we're going to from this conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say 90% of the world gets lost in that present happiness. And what religion is saying is, don't fall for that. Then the answer is, what do we fall for? What do we then strive for? If it isn't more money, it isn't more chocolate, it isn't more smell of roses, what do I then go for? Then the religion says, go for lasting happiness. Then the question comes up, what is lasting happiness? And how do I achieve that lasting happiness? And then the answer is that lasting happiness is contentment, tranquility, equanimity. That is what lasting happiness is. And in fact, science has clearly now recognized that and the physical realms, that money and more pleasure, more joy is not what's going to bring you lasting happiness, contentment. It is going to be the single word, equanimity. And that will come through a mindful, meditative, spiritual, or a natural experience. And so one can talk about happiness in there. Thoughts, comments, and questions on that? Do people see the difference in the present happiness or lasting happiness?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. So Anisha, I'm going to ask you this. What are you striving for? What are you striving for?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by lasting happiness?
Yeah. Are you looking in your life at this stage in life? Are you looking for present happiness? Are you looking for lasting happiness?
Lasting happiness.
Lasting happiness. So
Present happiness, yeah. I mean, as you said, it like you feel it and then you thrive more, which will be more like stable, I would say, or it gives you.
yeah.
Yeah.
So a
So-
good way to think about this are these what we call bubbles of happiness. Some are momentary, some last for hours and days, some expand in a large way, some burst in a very sad way. You have a nice car, but you get into an accident or something. So think about these bubbles of happiness, but being mindful, not showing off, not being obsessive about these can definitely expand those bubbles of happiness and lead to lasting happiness.
other questions or comments? Sanjay bhai, what do you think of the present and lasting happiness model?
Yeah, I think interesting. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, we should all go for lasting happiness. That
So
should be the goal.
that should be the goal. So I had this conversation with my son, who's early 20, he's 22, 23. And he said, Dad, I'm not into the equanimity and tranquility. I want more, to do more stuff, yes, get a new car or get a new stuff. And I said, okay. But I said that there will come a time where that is not going to give you joy and pleasure. There'll come a time, not very far off, that there will be a sense of equanimity. And that if you're not able to get that car, if you're not able to get that what you desire, there is unhappiness that comes with this. And those cycles of ups and downs that you go through in life, if you know that there is a stable that is there. But then Jainism, and yeah, go ahead, Sanjay, what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, it also depends on the what stage of life you are. I mean, what's your age and what do you want to get at that time? Every time with the age, it changes.
But it changes. Yes. So
Very
what we're
good.
seeking, absolutely, what we're seeking in happiness changes with age. So then,
And it also changes with what you have.
yes,
If you don't have good health, then asking for or striving for stronger health is going to be very strong on your list for lasting happiness. Any case, let's
So, and then what spirituality says, what every religion says, that there's something even beyond equanimity, beyond the present life. There is something beyond, and the calmness of the present. And that, if in Western tradition, we can call it bliss, we can call it nirvana, moksha. And that is where the element of the soul takes on a new being, a new level of place where we have no more cycles of life or death, no more karmas, and then we can achieve nirvana and moksha. And that is the definition, eternal happiness. So am I looking for eternal happiness? The answer is no. I mean, we know the path to eternal happiness. Jainism gives that. Other religions give that as well, to total bliss. But I know that that's there. Maybe at some stage in life, I will seek that path. But for now, I am seeking equanimity, lasting happiness. Thoughts, comments, questions on looking at happiness in this way?
But if you have time, we'll come back. I think we should.
Sure. And then,
Yeah.
and then going to this, how do these things get to happiness? Jain path, Jain way of life. If we do the practices, the principles mindfully, that is what will allow us to achieve that happiness. Okay. Now we're going to switch gears and go into looking at the philosophy and how Jainism can help us achieve that equanimity, that lasting happiness. And then, as for monks, how does it help us achieve moksha? And those elements, how we can explain to one another. And that comes into this whole idea of theory of life, theory of soul, theory of karma, and theory of moksha. Let's take a few minutes and then talk about this. And Jürgen Bhai, you can add in, and others, please take a few moments and just chime in on those thoughts. So being an element, having learned medicine, and Amit, you as well, clearly in medicine, we learned in science, we learned the categorizations of all the species of life, right? We agreed that the fundamental jiva, and then the fundamental concept of life is there. And very interestingly, how science has divided, right? Biological DNA is what is there. What Jainism would say is there's an element, there's a soul that is there. Substances, there's living and non-living. The only difference here is that there's soul. Then Jainism divides it into mobile and immobile. And if you look at the animals section, it divides it, organism also to move on their own. Think about this. Two different elements, two different ways of doing things, spiritual, Jainism, and science. And then they divided both living, non-living, animals, moving, non-moving. And then Jainism, because it didn't have that depth of knowledge at that time, divided by senses. And then we have divided them in the much, much greater way too. So where does all of these concepts begin? It all comes from the chapter 2 of Theory of Soul. So the first concept is that there is theory of life, and that we can compare life that is in science and that is life that is in Jainism. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. And it gets interesting. We'll go into theory of soul. So I'll share this, and Amit will understand as a physician very well. As a doctor, I see patients in the ICU who are critically ill. So a few months ago, I saw someone who was in the ICU. They were critically sick. They were on the ventilator, a breathing machine. They were a heart pump machine. Their brain was being monitored. And the question was, are they alive or are they dead? How do we know if a person is alive or someone is dead? In the physical realms, and then in a spiritual realm. And what's the difference? Anyone want to go there and share? Amit, how do you determine in science if someone is alive or dead in the medical field?
So normally we have standard ways of looking at if they're brain dead or not.
Yes.
So usually the neurology team, they do their special test and they come up with it if you're brain dead or not. But I'm not sure about the spiritual part. I have no clue about.
Right. So let me ask Sanjay Bhai, how does one determine when the soul leaves the body?
I mean, when person stop breathing, I mean, that's where you say the soul left the body.
Right. But now with the ventilator, it becomes difficult to determine because you can keep the ventilator going, right?
Yeah.
So there is great deal of uncertainty. I don't have the right answer on this concept, but I think what is really important in our discussion is what's in back of our mind. There is a time when someone is alive, and there's a time when someone is dead. Physically, one can say in the scientific realm, if they are brain dead, we have a definition that they are no longer alive. They are brain dead and body dead. It is really funny. Each state has a different rule. This is a joke that we do all the time in medicine and teaching medical students. Each state has a different rule of what is defined as death. Tennessee has a rule that if your EEG is flat, brainwave is flat, you are brain dead, you are considered as dead, even though heart is pumping and your lungs are pumping. Kentucky has a different rule. They don't, I'll just make it up. They don't have a rule that it's the brain death that defines it. It's the pupils that are there. So the funny thing is, you can be in an ambulance and you could be dead in Tennessee, you could be alive in Kentucky, and then in Virginia, you could be dead again, because it's based on the definition. In the spiritual realms, what happens is we say, wait a second, death is when the soul leaves the body. But that takes the assumption that the soul exists. So the theory and the belief that the soul exists is a fundamental concept that one has to understand in the theory of soul. Then the question is, what is the soul? And how does one understand it in Jainism? So in Jainism, the soul is a perception, awareness, and consciousness. It has the characteristics and function of darshan, gyan, virya, and sukh, right? So it's perception, the ability to perceive, the ability to gain knowledge, ability to have energy, and to have blissfulness. And when all of the karmas are shed, then you have infinite perception, energy, bliss, and knowledge. Now, this is the depth that we'll talk about in terms of the soul. And then we can go into more depth in it in talking about its various characteristics, is the attributes of the soul. And it is actually described by the negatives instead of positives. It is indestructible, genderless, ageless, impenetrable, invisible, unbreakable, uncapturable, intangible. That's the physical characteristics of the soul. That's why we can't find it in the physical realms. Now, in the mental realms, it doesn't have any desire, ego. It is an individual entity, all according to Jainism. It is a thought-free, possession-free mental. And in the metaphysical realm, the soul is immortal, pure, and eternal. So I pause here for a minute and say the difference between science and religion is the theory of soul. The theory of life, science and Jainism are together. They divide up everything, divide the world into living, non-living, together. It is in the theory of soul when that separation occurs. So I want to pause with that and see, and you have to be in the belief realm to be in at the present time to believe in the theory of soul. Thoughts, concepts, ideas. And then next gets even complicated in a way on the interaction of the physical and the spiritual world. And we'll talk about that. Any questions on this? Okay. And then it gets really interesting is when the theory of soul then goes to the next stage, when we have the interaction of soul and physical, is the theory of karma. Okay. All right, we're going to take a deep dive into this and sort of bear through these models, but at the end, I am almost certain that you will enjoy understanding the theory of karma from a different perspective. So what Jainism is saying is that you have the body, which is this. You have the soul, but then you have an interaction between the souls and multiple souls and the soul and the physical world. And they are occurring through karmic particles. In Jainism, the karmic particles are physical. Mental physical activity is how that interaction happens through our TSA, like we talked about, thought, speech, and action. And then there is a metaphysical process, the inflow of karma, the intentions behind the karma, intensity of the karma, bonding of karmas, modification, fruition. There are all of these elements that play out in the karma theory. We won't go through all of them, but we will introduce. Why am I mentioning all of them? Because they're mentioned step by step by step in the Tattva Sutra book and in all of theory of Jainism in karma. So if you read about theory of karma, you will learn those in those ways. Okay, let's sort of look through the model and see how these things relate. All right, so here we have the soul, and then there are the karmic particles. And we can put them as right now as plus and minus, good karmas and bad karmas. The judgment of a good and a bad is something we'll set aside for a moment in our, but let us first determine that there are particles that are attaching to the soul. Now, how do they come in and attach? Well, if you have a thought, you have a speech or action. If you're doing some of those things, the karma particles enter the soul. And that's called asra. Okay? Influx of karmic particles are coming in is asra. All right. We thought that was simple enough, but it then goes a bit more complicated, because what kind of karmic particles, what are they, good, bad, and so forth, and then will they bind or not? It is the asrav is inflow, but then they're modified by virtues or vices. So we call these kashais: krodh, man, maya, lobh. Opposite is shama, modesty, straightforwardness, and generosity. Right? So what happens is your intention, so inflow and it's a positive or negative, virtue or vice is added on, and then what is your intensity? That was intention, then is intensity. If you had a really angry episode, that would bring in really intensive karma, rage, anger. If you were just slightly upset, right? Suppose someone in a way cuts you off and you got really angry, the intensity would be in that. If you just got lightly upset, then it would be that. So what happens is the karma, the nature of karma, the quantity, the duration, the intensity, you add those, and there are different types of karmas as well. Destructive, the ghati, aghati karma. And you build them, they are relating to different parts of our lives. So Aghati karma is relating to the body, physical, age, health, environment, and Ghati karma is relating to our awareness, knowledge, energy, bliss, those that are related to the soul. So the movement of karmas then happens in the following way. We have thought, speech, and action. There is an inflow, there is intentions there, and then there's intensity, and then there's bonding. I'm going to pause for a minute and have Yogan Bhai maybe comment on this and others to ask questions and comment. And then we will sort of put this together in how these relates to our choices and intentions as well. But
No, I
this,
just wanted to make a quick comment that this is
yeah,
probably the most beautiful and elaborate and quite accurate description of how life works. If you could imagine 2,000 years ago, people had our monks and nuns and enlighteners had come up with. And it's so impressive that even today, a theory like this, at least a paradigm, this model, describes what happens and is there. The actual mechanism of the karma cycles and soul and karma may, you may agree or not agree, but the paradigm, the model still is quite accurate.
so, and I'll ask folks thoughts, comments, questions on what they think about karma and what they've heard about kashais and intensity and bondage and so forth. Anyone? Yeah, Amit.
I had a thought once like that we give so much importance to thoughts. And a lot of times it's not voluntary, the thoughts just happen. I mean, why we give so much importance to it and why that becomes such an important factor of karma.
So in Jainism, and I would even say in life, the thoughts are actually the root cause of our actions so often. So let's take the incident of the police brutality, the policeman beating up Tyree Nichols. Okay. Now let's sort of take that back step in the intention or thought process. So here are 5 policemen who beat up this guy. They did that physical action, right? They did the speech. They were yelling, cursing at him. Now let's go back as to how that speech and that action were generated. And if you look at, and this is my theory and presumption, and having worked with the mayor and so forth, this is actually what we were, talking about, having programs to help police, just like prisoners and others, change their level of thought or thinking. If their level of thinking is that I'm going to subjugate everyone and beat up other people as a policeman, I'm able to do that. That they're thinking, that's where the problem lies. If you and I were individuals who, with our thought, our ways of thinking, we would not have been able to say those things or do those actions. And so the root of every action is in the thinking, a concept which is really important in Jainism and not well accepted, I think, outside of Jainism. Do you see that, Amit?
Yes.
And so I would argue with you and say, if anything, we need to put a lot more emphasis on the thinking of individuals rather than just penalizing them for their actions. So just like I would say, putting people in jail because they've committed a crime is downstream, way downstream. You got to be working on preventive stuff. If I can give you an aspirin, or if I can have you have a more vegetarian diet and reduce your risk of cancer and cholesterol buildup and a stroke and a heart attack, that is where those thoughts can be prevented into the actions. And that is, in fact, what Jainism is saying, that the core of trying to prevent things, it should be in that thought process. What do others think of that? Does that make sense? Is that how you understand Jainism also?
I totally agree with that. Like, thought is the starting point of all actions. So I totally agree with your thought process. And I think if we are able to control our thoughts, it can help us in the long term. I think the question then, it would be like, how do we control, or how do we make sure that our thoughts are in the right direction?
Yes. And what do you think Jainism says? What does Jainism say how to get those thoughts in the right direction?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have an answer.
Yes. Anisha, you were saying?
No, I said આપણામાં વિચારહિંસા જે કે છે ને, like create good thoughts by avoiding.
Yes. Bad thoughts. So first step is you're in a good setting. So you go to the temple, you're in a good setting. You want to be having good thoughts. So it begins with, yes, in a good setting, physical setting, spiritual setting, but then self-reflection, right? Samayik. What is the core? Samayik. Meditation. And then tap, tyag. Lot of the practices that we're talking about. In fact, that is the transformation that Jainism is teaching us. That is the process of transforming that we need to be doing. It is from the thought to tap, tyag, and then going to the next stage.
Being raised a Jain, this is almost natural to us. The concept of non-violence, even to a small insect or a fly or something. And that training throughout our lives, and also being vegetarian, respecting animals and so on, and obviously humans, and giving dan, and so all these things continue to train our mind, and therefore our reflex action. Sometimes we don't have time to think, but we have a reflex action. Even those reflex actions are not going towards harming others, but more of helping others.
So just as you and I could not beat Tyree Nichols, we would even have difficulty speaking ill like that. But ordinary people can see all of that happening to animals, and that doesn't affect them. And so all of this, and it's really weird how this can happen to cows and pigs and stuff. But if you talk about slaughtering or killing dogs or horses, that's unacceptable. It is all in the mind that there is that thought process. And so that's so critically important. Good point. Other conversation on that?
I think surrounding around you is very important.
Sorry, surroundings?
Surroundings.
Huge. And I think that
our friends, our family, our relationships, our colleagues at work, all these things are so critical also in shaping our mind and our speech and action.
So I wrote an article for USA Today, and I'll share it in the group. And it was a week after the the death of Tyree Nichols. And I said, the surrounding is really the culture. We are living in a culture of violence. And it is, everyone is talking about getting, if I have a gun, I want a bigger gun. I want more guns. I want an automatic gun. That I'm going to, so that culture, that surrounding, the atmosphere, the environment that we are creating is an environment of violence. And we should be thinking about creating an environment of non-violence. And yes, the police need to be trained on how to do that. So we're meeting with the mayors, meeting with the district attorney. The district attorney came to our house about 3 months ago. And we had this conversation with Sri Ravi Shankar. And they have a wonderful program, Cities for Peace. And we're training the police, training even the gang members into thinking and changing their thought process. So
Art of Living has a program for the prisoners too.
yes, and we talked about that program very much so. And Steve Mulroy, the DA, was very involved in the conversation. And in fact, in the next couple of weeks, we're connecting with his office again and starting that. So great to put it in a practical terms, but then now another deep dive into this theory of karma. So how does karma work in our day-to-day lives? Suppose there is an influx of karma. And yes, we have it with the intensity, intention, all of that, we put it in. What that karma does is it creates a particular situation, but it has modifiers. What do I mean? The modifiers are a catalyst, nimit, that can help create a particular situation. Or there is an effort, purusharth. And so the theory of karma says that you can go from a particular action situation to so a particular karma will create a particular situation. And that then situation will create a choice in which you and I have to decide. If I am in front of Tyree Nichols, am I going to kick him or am I going to pick him up and put him in the car and take him to the hospital? There is a choice, and we manifest that choice in our thought, speech, and action. And that then leads to more karma being added or internalized, in which there is a catalyst and there is a nimit. There is a purusharth or effort. Individuals, we put in our effort, the situation around us is the catalyst. Unfortunately, for Tyree Nichols, the catalyst, the situation around in ways that was the negative part, created a negative situation in which another choice is made, which then leads to another thought, speech, and action by an individual, which then leads to more karmas, inflow, and situation. And so this is the cycle of karma that one talks about. This is, think about if you've talked about the cycle of how clouds, rain, water comes and then gets evaporated, and the cycle of water that there is there. There is cycle of life, right, that happens. All of these, the world is full of cycles, and this is a cycle of karma. Science has yet to have discovered this. We know that. Science obviously doesn't believe in this, but in the spiritual realms, this is how bad things happen to good people is explained. Why one life to the other, how those things happen. And so this is the cycle of karma. Any thoughts, comments, or questions on that? Okay. Great. But then there's a fourth theory, and the fourth theory goes into great detail in liberation. This is chapter 10 of the Tattva Sutra. If you're sort of following my slides, you notice how each of the theories are sort of connected to a chapter in the Tattva Sutra. And in our last session, we will go into more detail into that. And what basically a theory of moksha is saying, that the journey to happiness, equanimity, and moksha. We've talked about present happiness, we've talked about lasting happiness, and then the eternal happiness. It is doing no harm to the self and to others, be happy and find joy in our day-to-day life, and then it begins the heart steps. Go for equanimity, diminish pains or pleasures with lasting happiness, and then further attaining moksha, no cycles of rebirth, with eternal happiness. And so the word happiness is very broad and packed, but in this totality, it includes trying to achieve moksha. So I'll pause with that, and I'll have comments and questions, and then go back to our Hasi model as well. But what do people think? Thoughts and comments?
So is having desire considered bad or not? Because I feel like we said that having some desires, being able to get those makes you happy. I guess that's one of the steps to get to the next step of equanimity. So
yes,
good or bad to have it? Or
okay, very good question. So desires, and when you're looking at present happiness, I have a desire to have a piece of chocolate. I have a desire to have a new car. What desires are is that they create expectations. And if those expectations are not met, then it will lead to unhappiness. And so when we're seeking material desires, then one has to know that not getting those desires will make us unhappy. And so within limit, yes, desire to have food to sustain myself, appropriate. Excessive desires, which we discussed in aparigraha, right? If you recall, if you went to the excessive desires, that will make us unhappy. And so I'll show this slide. So when we talk about desires, your needs and desires would be wants, basic needs, necessities, comforts, wants, and greed. It is a continuum, and we have to decide where do we want to be ourselves in that continuum. But over time, if we want to achieve equanimity, we need to decrease our wants, work with the basic needs and necessities, and that will help us achieve happiness. Does that help?
yes.
Yeah. So desires in limitations within a parigraha control and you decide where you want to put the limit, right? So I'll be honest, right? I want basic needs, I want necessities, I want comforts, I want a nice car, warm home. I can do without greed, don't need the major diamonds, but my desire is that I have few wants. Yes, maybe some movies, entertainment and stuff, a nice iPhone device, but then working backwards. But I'm not quite there yet to be a monk where I'm willing to give up these basic needs in tremendous limitations either. So it's where
these
you draw the
desires are
line.
in these desires are in the material realm. But if you
Right.
think about, let's say you have a desire to help eradicate a disease, and Manoj is working on eradicating TB in India, for example. That has slightly different kinds of desire. That's a different kind of desire, and then so it depends quite a bit. But a lot of the technology that gets developed, a lot of advances that we've made, have been desires of people who've been wanting to be entrepreneurs, who've been wanting to invent new things. So we want to make sure that we don't kill that. But even that in an excessive can also be not good.
So there's desires are there, but the other part of it is attachment, right? So when you have an attachment along with the desire, right? Suppose I say, yes, I have the desire to work on eliminating a disease, noble cause. I have the desire as a doctor to help patients. But then if I have an attachment that, oh, I am the best doctor, I am the top guy, I attach to my ego, I attach to my name. What Jainism is saying is that's when you will get into trouble and unhappiness will happen. And so those desires, those realms will be negative. Attachment is problematic. Now, remember, we started the conversation about what is happiness. And so many of us said that it is to be close to my family in ways, be attached to my family as well. What Jainism is saying is yes, for the present happiness, yes. For equanimity, know the distance. But when you're looking for eternal happiness, blissfulness, then the answer is no. No attachment. Your brother, sister, spouse, children, they will not be there for you when you're trying to achieve eternal happiness. Good question. Other thoughts? So this is, I don't know if, did anyone have a chance to look at the template worksheet? Yes? So
I have
yes.
a question, Manoj. How do
Ji.
I opt out? I'm sorry, you must have
Please.
sent a link, right, for this
Yeah.
one, or
Yes.
I couldn't.
You couldn't open it. Okay. We'll make sure to send. We'll make sure to send this again. So it's a template. Yeah, template that you can do. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
And what I'm going to do is there's a 2-minute video of it. I'm going to stop share, and then I'm going to share again with the video, and then we can see that. I think that will play out. But yes, you had another question.
And by the way, filling out these self-reflection sheets is extremely meditative and extremely insightful.
I want to take a few minutes and talk to you about the Jain Path Journey. This is a Jain journey sheet, which can help us better understand ourselves. So in the first part of the sheet is about my life, where you fill in simple things, name, age, where you're from, and then going a bit in depth, talking about 3 things that you're seeking in your life. You can hear it, life, right? Professional life, and religious life. And put in your photo as well, because this is something that you'll reflect on over years. And then the second sheet is about my reflections. What this does is looks at your practices in day-to-day life, practices that relate to the diet, to forgiveness. So what we do is we have a mini reflection, and then we have the full reflection. The mini reflection talks about individual practices, such as vegetarianism. So we can say that I'm not vegetarian, or I'm a strict vegetarian, and then you score yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. Forgiveness, you can say I get angry quickly, I verbally ask for forgiveness. So you put a 4 in. My balancing of needs and wants. And like that, you do the drop down and then hit the
allows for self-reflection
and
here.
then you have a mini reflection score. The third sheet is about happiness.
This is
It
what we talked
allows
about
us
today.
to reflect on where we are in life. Are we happy? So on a scale of 1 to 5, we can put at where we are, mostly happy. And as you can see, the color changes according to where we're at. Then what brings us happiness? We prioritize. If we believe that it is simple joy and pleasure that brings us happiness, we give it a high priority. If we are looking for equanimity and tranquility, again, that gives us a higher priority as well. And then we go into depth. At present, how happy are you? Is it the health which is giving us happiness? Is it affection which is giving us happiness? And so forth. We can look at security, and on the drop down, we press down and the number and color changes, and we can look at significance, and lastly, looking at equanimity. And we finally get a score of what our total happiness is. Lastly, we talk about our priorities. So on the right-hand side, we have the 24 Jain values, those values that are relating to non-violence, such as vegetarianism, forgiveness, carefulness, those that are relating to non-absolutism, those values like meditation, open-mindedness, and those that are relating to non-possessiveness. And what we do is we take a minute to prioritize what is important. So on the drop down, you hit vegetarian diet and check if you've fully achieved that vegetarian diet and so forth. In non-absolutism, what's very important to me
So we'll
is
talk about
meditation and
practice,
mindfulness.
all
I
these
put that as a
practices
top
next
priority,
week. We'll talk
and
about
then
those.
humility as another priority, and like that each
So
one.
we're trying
This
to make it very
exercise then
practical.
helps us better understand who we are and how we can go on the Jain path journey. Thank you so much. I hope this is helpful. Jai Jain.
Okay. So that video is available, and
Jai Jain.
so you can take a look at that. But more important for your own self-reflection, take moments and do that. So let's finish up. If any other questions, happy to take that. Otherwise, we can finish with Namokar Mantra. Any questions or comments? Jigar, go ahead.
Hey, yeah, I actually wanted to connect with you offline to do something similar, and like for our community in Seattle. So I just maybe if I can get your number or detail somewhere, somehow we can connect offline for this.
Sure. I'll give the number here if you want to write it down. It's 901.
Just once.
I'll put it in chat for everyone.
Yeah, you can go ahead. 901
240-2602. And happy to do this. We've done Parshala classes for Chicago, Houston, Memphis, on very similar lines to share with folks. Yep. So I'm happy.
And we'll be doing one for Boston and sometime in March for YJA. We're able to condense it down to 1 hour also, and
okay.
focus on some of the key concepts. So
Well,
it depends
more, yeah.
The team
Here, actually, we're sharing it with you, just a few people to get a sense of what are some values, what are some of the concepts that will go well with the crowds of young people and others. So
makes sense.
Great. Okay. Let's finish up. Would Sanjay Bhai, would you like to do Namokar Mantra for us for closing?
Namo Arihantanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ariyanam, Namo Vajjanam, Namo Loe Sauvasahunam, Eso Panch Namukaro Sauva Pao Panasno, Manglanancha Sauvasing, Padmam Hawaii.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Shanti Shanti. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week, and we'll have lots of fun with the Jain practices. They're actually, this was very deep and heavy. That one's a lot fun, and we'll have fun with that. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.